Hello, my name is Jeremy Freeman. I'm the archaeologist with the Standing Rock THPO office. And unfortunately, I was going to be teaching a class for the traditional arts series in person, but unfortunately, because of the virus, we're going to have to actually do a video instead. So I'm here in my living room, and I'm going to use this opportunity to go over the basic concepts of flint knapping. Now, flint knapping is an ancient tool form. It's probably one of the oldest forms of oldest traditional arts, and probably one of the oldest long-lived forms of making tools. And essentially, what it is, flint knapping is just the making stone tools using materials such as this. This is a chert or flint that's can fracture in such a way that can be used to make stone tools. So there's a couple of basic concepts that are used when doing flint knapping. So the first is that this material will fracture like glass. That's because it contains silica, very similar to glass. And if you've ever seen a window where somebody shot a BB at it, and its fracture pattern, what it does is, I'm going to draw a diagram here now. I'll bring it closer so you can see what I'm actually showing you. But if you were to have a BB here that were to hit a pane of glass, and I'll come closer so you can see what I'm doing here, to hit a pane of glass, what you'll actually generally see is once it strikes the glass, it will fracture the glass in such a way, and I'm going to actually draw this a little wider here so you can actually draw on it. When it hits the glass or impacts the glass, it starts out small, just where it hits the glass, and it expands out in a cone. It actually will pop out a cone, and that's what we refer to as a conchoidal fracture. And that's how that's the fracture pattern of glass. It will always generally fracture in that way. So it's the same principle that we use for flint knapping. Is the concept of this conchoidal fracture. And so when you are working with a piece of chert or flint like this, what you're doing is it's that conchoidal fracture. It fractures in that cone every time, but it's actually just a partial of the cone. So if I were to remove part of this flint here, and I'm just going to knock off a flake here, and this is what we refer to as percussion flaking, and I'll go over that here in a second. But if you were to use this, and I'm going to knock off a flake, and that flake actually fractures, and it looks something like that when you knock off a flake. Now, what I did is that's actually the part of the cone. So it starts out small and expands, and I actually just use that fracturing pattern where I use that cone-style fracture to remove that flake. And it doesn't look like a cone because if we were to hold this up to the piece from which I detached it, so what I'm doing is here's our conchoidal fracture, here's our cone, and here's the narrow part of the cone, and it expands, and most of it's just expanding into space. And I'm just glancing off of the one part, the left side of the cone here, to actually remove or detach a flake from this piece. And so that's the basic premise you want to keep in mind when you're trying to reduce a nodule such as this down into a tool. And it'll be the same principle throughout the whole process. And this is what we refer to as lithic reduction, where you're taking a nodule such as this, and a nodule is basically just a hunk of rock, a hunk of chert or flint, a stone that will fracture conchoidally. And these occurred naturally. They were deposited by glaciers. There are different ways that chert or flint will occur. It can either be the nodular form, it can be bedded where it's actually a bedrock, and you can actually harvest it or extract it through a mining process. It can be rather small pebbles that you can, about that size that you can actually use to make stone tools as well. And so there's different types of chert or flint will occur in different ways, and they'll all have different properties as well. Some will have a smoother texture. This is actually Georgetown flint, and I actually ordered this from online. This is actually, and I'll bring this closer to the camera. You can actually see this, it's got this kind of waxy, lustery surface to it. This is a really fine-grained chert that will has very few inclusions in it. Those inclusions are essentially impurities, or they could be quartz bugs, basically little pockets of quartz. Could be fossils such as like crinoids or oolites or sponge spicules that you'll see in the material. That's actually, it is those inclusions that archaeologists use to help identify the source for the different types of stone material, or what we call tool stone, out there. So this is a relatively smooth or fine-grained lithic type. So the fracturing pattern is going to be fairly regular. If you were to have a piece that would have more irregularities in it, more quartz veins or bugs, if it has relatively large fossils in it, those can lead to unpredictable fracturing patterns. And so when you're working with a piece, it may suddenly shatter or break because of those inclusions, and that may result in failure of the particular tool that you were trying to achieve. So that's the first concept as far as is that conchoidal fracturing pattern. The second thing you want to keep in mind when you're taking a nodule such as this and you're reducing it down into a tool, and I'm going to bring this closer once again, is that you have this kind of central ridge, essentially central portion of the nodule. You can see I have a ridge here. Now, when you're flint knapping, you want this ridge to be below center. So you can see that we have the thickness here, and the ridge here is actually down. The center is probably closer to right here of the actual material, but my edge is a little bit below it. And that's your striking edge. That's where you want your striking edge to be when you're trying to detach flakes. If you were to try to detach a flake like this, you wouldn't actually be able to really get a good flake to detach. And the reason is because the flake, the direction of the flake will actually just travel vertically. Where your goal is essentially you want this flake to actually travel across the face of the material so that we can take this rather thick piece and actually reduce it down into a thinner piece. And that's where we're actually going to get our stone tools from, is where we're reducing them down. Again, that's called the lithic reduction process. We want to thin this down so that we can actually make a tool out of it. So now I'd like to go over the basic tools that you'll use in flint knapping. You'll have some of these in the kit that you've been provided. So the first thing is a hammerstone. And the hammerstone is going to be used for what we refer to archaeologically as hard hammer percussion. And so you're going to actually use that to knock flakes off of your nodule. And you're going to use this for the early reduction stages. So I have this hunk of chert here, this nodule. And I'm going to start by using the hard percussion. to remove some larger flakes. So you basically, it's a river cobble that you would use for a hammerstone, something that's harder than the material that you're trying to fracture, essentially. Once you whittle down your piece into a smaller piece, you'll be using, there's another tool that we use, it's called soft hammer percussion. And this is represented here by a copper billet. Traditionally, they would have been an antler billet. Moose is often used, a moose billet is often used like the back end of it where it's rounded. So this is what I just actually ordered off of Amazon. You can find anything on Amazon, of course. So once you get down to narrowing it down to a smaller piece and you want to do more refined work and you're ultimately going to be removing smaller flakes and you want a little more control, you'll be using a billet for that work. And then once you get down to the really final stages of your tool production, you'll be using a tool. Traditionally, these would have been antler tines from a deer or whatever. This is a copper one that, again, I ordered off of Amazon. And this is where you're actually going to, what's referred to as pressure flaking. It's pressure flaking because you're actually going to be pressing the flakes off of your piece. So it's just through pressure rather than percussion that you'll be removing some of those flakes. And I'll demonstrate that process here shortly. Another tool that's good to have is an abrader. And these traditionally would have been a sandstone block. Of course, I'm just using a whetstone here. These are all things that are commercially available. They mimic or simulate some of the traditional tools, but if you wanted to go full traditional, you can certainly obtain these sort of items out there as well, and you can either just find them naturally or you can even order them online. There's many vendors who actually sell Flint Knapping supplies. Something else that I do recommend is a piece of leather where you're going to be doing some of the work on your lap, and most of it will be done on your lap. So this will help prevent any impacts, and secondly, any cuts that you may have. So what you will notice is that you will produce sharp edges, especially with these flakes that you detach, and you want to be very careful with those because they can cut you before you realize you're even cut, and you'll start bleeding. So you want to be careful when you're working with this material. I do also recommend safety glasses. I'm just wearing my glasses here. But if you have safety glasses or if you wear contacts or anything, you do want to prevent the material from getting in your eyes because it will actually bounce back or ricochet. And getting a little piece that you'll see once you start the process, it can be very fine. You don't want to get one of those in your eye because it will scratch up your cornea or your retina quite significantly. Also, I recommend placing a tarp. You can't see the tarp here, but I actually have a tarp below me. It's going to catch all the material that I have that I'm going to remove from my nodule. It will become quite messy, so you do want to make it easier for yourself to clean up. Something else that's recommended, and I'm not going to use it for this video because I'm not actually going to do really go to town necessarily on the Flint Knapping, but if you're going to spend several hours doing this, and this is something that actually requires a great deal of practice, I do recommend wearing a dust mask as well because you do get some very fine powder that will result from the tool manufacture process. And it can lead to a condition. It won't happen if you're just playing around and experimenting. But if you did this quite often, it can lead to a condition known as silicosis, and that's actually getting some of that silicon dust in your lungs, and something that you would generally want to avoid. So those are my recommendations as far as the tools and the proper safety precautions for doing Flint Knapping. It's not a bad idea to have some Band-Aids handy, just in case, because, or you may even want to wear gloves to help prevent some cuts. I typically don't myself, I just kind of go with the risk. I will undoubtedly cut myself as I'm trying to do this demonstration, I'm sure. So I want to first demonstrate that hard hard hammer percussion and what that process looks like and how you would actually go about using it to start that early reduction stage, that early tool manufacture. Now, when you have a nodule like this, you can see that there's really two parts, and I'll bring this closer once again. You can see that there are two parts of the stone. There's this really glossy looking, glassy-like material, and then there's this other material that's it's actually weathered. It's not as glossy. It's kind of dull. That's due to the weathering process. That's what we refer to as the cortex. And so what you would first want to do when you're reducing a nodule is you would want to remove the cortex. That's what we refer to as a decortication flake, or the decortication process, where I'm first going to try to remove that weathered surface. And that weathering surface just comes from the natural precipitation of minerals present in the material, and then it's introduced material from the atmosphere, dust and stuff like that, and also is combined with microbial activity to precipitate out some of the minerals, particularly iron and other types of minerals that are inherent or part of the material. So I'm going to start by detaching or working on removing some of the cortex. You can see that I have a large piece of cortex here. I won't be able to get that off like right away, because it's going to be it's on the side there. It's really thick. I would have to slowly whittle away at that to remove that cortex there. Some of these other parts, like here, I can easily remove that with a flake, taking a flake off. Remember, you want that center line to be below, or where you're going to detach the flake, going to be below your center line. When I strike it, I'm going to hit the rock at a certain place, and this is going to create what's known as a platform. And to prepare the platform, sometimes this is where that abrader comes in. You use that abrader to grind down the surface just a little bit on that where your platform is going to be. The reason for that, some flint knappers will call it say it catches the material better, and ultimately that's what it is. It's at the edges of the rock it's a very thin piece. So if you, by grinding it down, you're actually getting it down to a slightly thicker piece where it's not razor thin. And the reason you'd want to do that is if you hit it where at the edge where it's really razor thin, you're going to remove very small flakes. It's not going to do what it's not going to travel very far across the face of the material. But in this case, we want it to travel. We want to try to detach a flake that actually travels across the bottom face of this nodule so that we can remove some of this cortex. So I'm going to demonstrate that. So I already ground it. Doesn't take much, just a couple abrasions on that platform is sufficient. And I'm going to actually hold the nodule on my lap here on my leg, and I'm going to take my hammerstone, and it's just a real fluid motion. Just I'm going to use my elbow to strike the material, and when I strike it, I'm not gonna bang on it. It's not gonna be a direct blow to the material. This isn't a strike like this isn't gonna do anything other than maybe fracture the material, might break it in half. It's a glancing blow. It's gonna be more like this. It's gonna just kind of hit the rock like this, and a kind of a circular motion like this. You can just barely glance the rock like that. Now it won't be a full swing because I'm gonna stop, of course, at my lap. But if I were to do this in midair, it would look something like this. This is the motion that you really essentially want when you're removing a flake. So I'm going to I'll show you how this looks by detachable flake. And I didn't quite get the length of flake that I wanted, but you can see here that I did remove some of that cortex, and I did remove a flake here. And there's certain characteristics about a flake that really kind of identify as a flake. So you can see here there's actually a bulbous area, and that's what we refer to as the bulb of percussion. And what we're looking at there is that cone. Remember that coil fracture? This is actually that cone right there. This is the force of me striking it with the hammerstone traveling through the rock. That platform that I prepared is actually right here. It's always going to be right below that bulb of percussion. And the platform will typically be like triangular shaped or lenticular, like lens shaped. Other things that you can potentially see on a flake, and this one actually has some good attributes. I don't know if you can see it there in the video very well, but it'll have ripples, and these ripples are actually the force of concussion traveling in a wave pattern through the rock. Now, these are all attributes when we're archaeologically, when we're looking for stone tools and we see a rock like this, those are the attributes we look for to determine whether or not it's an artifact, because those are characteristics that you will see on the artifacts that are produced from this process. This process it's very regular, it's very predictable. And it's using that predictability of the material and the process to manufacture stone tools. So, so that was the basic premise of removing a flake. Now, what you'll see is that you don't necessarily have to strike it really hard, the material really hard, but the harder you strike it, the longer the flakes generally will be. Although that's not necessarily the case either. It comes with a really kind of eyeing your piece to see, using those principles that we've already gone over, to see where the best flakes to detach are. Sometimes it has to do with where the angle that you strike, and it has to do with the material itself. So I'm going to see if I can get actually a better flake to detach here too, and I'm actually going to use actually a little bit of a ridge here. That this little protrusion here, I'm actually going to try to detach some of that and thin that down. So I just ground it a little bit with my whetstone, and now I'm going to try to see if I can remove a larger part of that. I'm just going to pull it off to the side of my lap here, and I think that's where I went wrong, is I was holding it too close to my lap, because I do want that motion a little as much as possible, that swinging motion to come through, and we'll see if I can do a better job this time with a longer flake. So you can see that definitely got a better flake off of that one. I wanted to go further on the material, but sometimes it's really the material itself. It can be challenging when it's flat like that, and so you just kind of have to really play with it and see how the stone itself is going to react. But that wasn't a bad flake to detach. I did get more of that material off. I did thin it a little bit. Unfortunately, it's going to leave a ridge here if I'm not careful. So I want to try to avoid that. So I'm going to see if I can try to detach more flakes to see if I can make it so I don't actually end up with a ridge. Yeah, just another flake. I see I'm getting some splatter everywhere, so you want to be careful, and you might actually need to spread more tarps out than what I have here. Now, I'm just going to continue to work this piece a little bit, so you can see the process and see what I can do as far as thinning this piece down. So that's what I was actually looking for. is a flake like this. So you can see I just detached this flake. This is what we call an ultra pass flake. It actually went all the way across. I didn't actually anticipate that at all, but in this case, it's probably a good thing. So you can see that this is a much longer flake, and that's what we want when we're thinning this down, because otherwise, if we don't, we're going to end up with a ridge here in the middle. That's going to be really hard to get rid of if I don't actually get longer flakes to detach from the surface there. And you can really see the attributes on this flake. You can see it's a really pronounced percussion. Get some really nice ripples here on the ventral face. This is what we refer to as the ventral face of the flake. And the back end of the flake is actually known as the dorsal face. So if you think of a dolphin, for instance, the dorsal fin is on the back, and that's the back of the flake essentially. Again, we have our platform here. And oftentimes, I'm looking to see if we have any other attributes on this particular flake. Oh yeah, here's some. Here you can see some what are known as radial fissures. That's also a characteristic you often see on flakes. We also have a partial step fracture right here. And those are generally caused by some sort of irregularity in the material. So it just kind of, the force just basically hits it and then stops and changes direction. That's where you get some of those step fractures. Typically, you want to try to avoid some of those step fractures because they can be problematic when you're trying to make a stone tool. But overall, it's not a bad flake. So I'm going to continue. I was just grabbing some of the other material that flew off. I'm gonna see if I can start working this piece, because remember we still have this big area of Cortex that's going to be troublesome. So I'll have to see if I can actually remove that. Now, ultimately, when you're thinning, because I've been knocking him off of this ridge, because remember we want it down below the center line. But you can raise this so they can remove flakes from the other side. And as you knock flakes off, you can actually kind of eye how you want to raise this. If we can raise this again above that center line, then we're just going to simply flip the piece over and we're going to start detaching flakes from the other side. And I'll see if I can do that here. Yeah, there we go. So, I had to detach a few flakes, but you can see this is the face I was removing from. But you can see how I've actually raised up that center line now to where it's actually above center. So I wouldn't want to continue trying to take flakes off this side. But what I can do now is I can actually rotate the piece over. And now you can see now it's below center line. And now I can try to start removing flakes from the other side. And that will help me to start thinning this piece down so that I can actually make it into a tool. Oh, and I actually just broke it. That will happen. So probably what happened, and I struck it in such a way, you can see that it actually fractured in half. It's probably because there was an impurity or irregularity in the material there. Not all is lost yet, because each of these can actually be reduced down into something usable as well. And we know that this happened to people making stone tools as well, because you'll find the fracture pattern just like that, where it failed, you know, while they were actually making the tool. As frustrating as it may be, it certainly happened. So I'm going to take off a few more flakes off of the smaller piece to see if I can do anything with it and maybe resurrect it. And some of this, it's just playing around with material and really getting a feel for it. I'm not sure if I'm going to really be able to do much with it because of the way it fractured, unfortunately. I'll see if I can actually do something with the with this piece. Now, I mentioned that once you get down to a certain part of your tool production, and obviously I'm not going to be able to, with this material, I probably won't be able to get it down to an actual point, but you'd use your billet to take off smaller flakes. Where you have a little bit more control, and that's I was probably a little overzealous when I was using the hard percussion hard hammer, the hammerstone, in that stage of the tool manufacture, whereas the billet may have been more appropriate. I'm just gonna work the edge here, and I'm just going to show you how this will be. It'll be removing smaller flakes along the edge, and that can be useful when you're really just doing some fine work. Now, I was really trying to get some of those longer flakes. The risk, of course, with getting those overshot flakes is breaking the material, and certainly, you know, it's something that happens, and it's something that, you know, just through time. You'll get a better handle of it as you practice. And the one thing about flint knapping is you can't necessarily just watch this video and become an expert. And I by no means would consider myself an expert either. I just more of a novice that I've taken a few flint knapping workshops so I can perfect my skill. I don't spend enough time, I don't think, to really pick up the real knack for the skill, but it's something that you just need to practice over and over. Now, I do want to demonstrate the final method of flake modification or the real fine tool manufacture, and that is using the pressure flaker, the antler tine that you may have in order to work a flake. And what you're doing with that is you're actually just taking the tine and you're just actually working along the edge, and you're just pushing off very small flakes, just through pressure, just like it sounds. And I'll show you how that's done. I'm just going to go around the edge here, and I'm just going to press off very, very small flakes. I think I'm working in the wrong direction here. So it's just kind of like a lever. You're just kind of using your thumb, and you're just kind of using it to apply pressure, using your hand as a fulcrum. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. So when you're like really refining an edge, this is what we refer to as pressure flakes, or retouching an edge. The reason you would do that is actually it's going to really make a really sharp edge. So you could actually use this to cut, you know, whatever material you're looking at. It could be a plant material, it could be meat, it could be leather. You know, if you're working, you know, making some sort of leather product or something like this will cut through just about anything. You can test it on a piece of paper, and you can see how sharp it is. I'm just going to take a piece of paper I just had randomly here, and I'm just going to demonstrate how sharp that is. So that was just, I didn't even apply much pressure. That's just cutting through the paper because it's just a really sharp edge. And so that's a tool by itself. You can actually use that. You could, if you're hunting, for instance, and you wanted to remove the bone, I'm sorry, the meat from the bone, you could use that to actually cut the flesh off or deflesh the bone, so you could take the meat back. So these what we refer to as expedient tools. You'll see these all over the place, and these are tools in and of themselves. It doesn't necessarily have to be just a formal tool like a projectile point or biface. These are probably the more common tools that we see because they're quick, easy, going to be used for one specific purpose rather quickly, and then probably discarded. And that's probably why we find so many of them. So my recommendation for you is that just to continue practicing on your material. And as far as where can you get the material, and like I said, these tools you can actually get on Amazon. I ordered these two things off of Amazon, the Pressure Flaker and the antler billet. I got the whetstone from Dollar Tree. I'm a big Dollar Tree advocate, so I don't like to spend a lot on my hobbies. So it doesn't have to cost you a lot to actually get into this. The material itself, you can order, you can go, if you type in Flint Knapping supplies or you'll come up with many different hits. People who sell raw material where you can order this. I actually ordered this online, this Georgetown Flint. They'll have different types of material that you can actually purchase and work with. You can also look for the nodules out naturally as well. Around here, the most common types are Knife River Flint, which you can actually find around just naturally. It is, a really high quality material that you can use for flint knapping. Tongue River Silicified Sediment is another material that occurs locally that you can potentially find nodules that you can use. And I've also seen petrified wood, and petrified wood will actually work. It's highly knappable. It has a lot of silica in it and will fracture in a conchoidal way that you can use it to make stuff as well. So with that, I'm going to end this demonstration by just playing around a little bit yet with on this piece and seeing if I can use my billet here to really thin this piece down. And I would say just don't be afraid to fail, because you learn a lot by failing, by accidentally breaking the material more than you had, unexpectedly. It's just something you have to really work at, and you start to get the knack of it, where you can see that I'm really starting to thin this piece down. And I'm starting to get a ridge, so I probably shouldn't get too carried away before I can't get rid of our ridge there. And I think it's probably too late. I think I've probably already created too much of a ridge that I probably won't be able to get rid of it unless I can take this flake off here, which I'm actually going to try that. If I can, I'm actually going to use the hammer stone for that and see if I can actually get a relatively long flake to detach. Wasn't too bad. I'm going to try. Well, it's getting closer, but unfortunately, I think I may have made a real challenge for me, a real pickle with this ridge here. But again, that's it may be possible I can thin down the other side, and perhaps that will help. Yeah, I mean I'm getting it down a little bit more. You can see. I'll bring it closer. I'm actually starting to get that ridge down. A lot of it's just strategy. You know, looking at this, where is that best platform? Again, you want to make sure that ridge is down below the center line. So I can't take that off, but I can work my way up to it. I can raise this area here and start to potentially narrow that down. But you know, a biface like that, where it got flakes thick enough for both sides, could be a tool itself. And sometimes that's, you know, the first starting point is just making a biface where you're taking flakes off of both sides, and that, you know, you get the feel for the material, you get the feel for the process of detaching the flakes, and then through practice and through time, you can start to make some formal tools. So I think that's going to be the end of this demonstration. I wish I was able to do this class in person so that I could actually help with the strategy as far as, like, you know, how to you know, look over the piece, how to eye that piece, where the strategy is, and how to develop that strategy of how to take this and narrow it down. But a lot of it, to be honest, just comes from practice. It comes from making mistakes. And as you make more mistakes, you're like, you know, you kind of realize that you know, you start to figure out how to actually improve your skill, you know, at Flint Knapping. And by making those mistakes, it helps with the next piece that you make. And eventually, if you practice enough, practice makes perfect, and you can eventually start making some formal tools. So thank you, everybody, for joining me for this video. And I hope this is helpful, and I hope you are interested in taking up the art of Flint Knapping. And I wish you luck and wish you well in your practices with doing some of the Flint Knapping. So thank you very much.